Good evening, everyone. My name is Ronald Smith, president of Sacramento Suburban Writers Club. Welcome all the artists and writers out there. And tonight, our guest speaker is Michael Fitzgerald, who has 40 years experience working as a writer and an editor for several newspapers. He's going to discuss the three rights of writing: the what, the how, and the who.
Right. But, I'm constantly for the whole month just taking notes or writing down notes on whatever topic I've decided to go with. And then a couple days before the meeting, I just rearrange all my notes into something to just, like I say, it's just reminders, not even a good word. It's just we all need to keep these things in mind, but none of it is information that we don't already know.
All right. Thank you, Gloria. Okay, and Brittany, I don't think is here, so I'm going to bypass Brittany. Oh, I want to, Gisela made it. She doesn't have a microphone, it doesn't look like, so I don't think we'll be able to hear Gisela, but I want to say hello. Welcome, Gisela. And Andrea Roth is here too. Andrea.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You know what? I think you came last month too, right?
Yes, I did.
Yes, welcome back. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's go back. Jeannie, membership.
You're muted, Jeannie.
I know, but I did the magic when it didn't do it. Anyway, I tell everybody to be sure to check their chats. Sometimes there are questions going on in the chats. So click on the little chat down at the bottom and see if there's anything you should be paying attention to. Okay, so we have a new member, but since she's not here, I'm not going to introduce her.
Okay.
Good plan.
All right. Okay, Mary Lou, newsletter.
Newsletter. Well, we tried something new to encourage everybody to read the newsletter, and that is to have a secret code to be sent to me. And if you do so with that in the subject line, you will be entered into a drawing for something like a $20 gift card for Barnes & Noble. At least that's what it is for now. I was convinced we couldn't do a gift card for Borders because they're no longer open. So we had all of four entries this month: Pat Biasotti, Eva Wise, Kathy McGreevy, and Laura. So we've got all these people here. Kellen, I know Laura Kellen, I didn't leave off your full name on purpose. So they're going to go into a bag for a drawing for the gift card. And I'm really tempted to say next month the person has to be present to win. Anybody in agreement with? Will we agree with that, or?
Oh, I'll go with that. But
Hey,
I also want to
it increases my odds.
It would. I'm not going to do it to them this month because Pat and Kathy didn't know, and no, they should be here. Okay, I'm scrambling through here. I'm not looking. Okay, got one. I got two. We'll make sure it's this one this time I pull it out. Kathy. Kathy is the winner. So she's not here. So it's not really fair to those two of you who are here. But next time we'll put that into you must be present to win. So, but it is a real thing. It's not something to be fluffed up. I want people to read the newsletter. So we're going to try this for a while and see if we get more readers of the entire newsletter.
Mary Lou, I don't think you should. I think you cut yourself short. That I think most people are reading that newsletter. It's a good newsletter. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just trying to encourage more participation. I want some feedback. Otherwise, I mean, it's not like this thing takes 10 minutes to put out. It takes days of work. Yeah, lots of time, and I want some feedback for me, so I'm not gonna be so frustrated. Fire me, find somebody else. Not yet, but
No.
But try to read the whole thing, and if you want in on the drawing, we'll do something again next month. Maybe Starbucks, maybe Leatherby's, maybe something like that. So until I go broke, we'll do this for a while.
Well, I would say As the person who just looked at your newsletter for the very first time, knowing nothing about your organization, I was very impressed, and that's one reason I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's participants, it's the members of the club who send things to me to be published. Otherwise, it would be a front page and a back page, and that would be it, the speaker, and that's about it. So send me short stories, send me poems, send me something that's worth printing. And you can also then claim that, not claim, you will be a published author.
Right.
So, okay, any other questions? I'll let Kathy know that she's the winner, and next month we'll have must be present to win on there.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay, Mort, do you want to say something about ordering any more anthology books?
I haven't received anything since last month. So we can order, I guess, anytime, and when we meet in person, or we can take those, there's about 15 people that should get a copy. We can email them and tell them to come pick them up, for example, at the church parking lot.
Okay.
But other than that, I haven't received anything.
Okay. All right, so
Wait, you did get Pat's and Tammy's, right?
Yes.
Okay, you're scaring me.
Well, we just got,
whoa,
hang on. I have Pat Biasotti. And you said
Tammy,
Anderson
Tammy.
sent in for Tammy. And Gloria got one from you. An order of the author copy. And I think I've already put the order, got one from, two from Jeannie, 3 from Deirdre, 2 from Mark Hecky. So that's it.
Okay,
all right. Okay, we're gonna start the workshop. Gloria.
Wait, you didn't ask your speaker coordinator if she had any updates.
I know I just crossed you off as you already spoke, and I forgot. Hey, Laura, speaker.
Okay, first of all, I would like to acknowledge that our speaker did pop in the room.
All right.
Michael Fitzgerald, hello. I did ask you to come a little later because as I warned you, we do get a little bit chatty and then we do have a workshop. So we're still in the beginning phases where we're going through all the new members and all the club business. And then we're gonna have our little workshop and then you'll speak. So that's where we're at in this process. So this is where I give my little update. I am your speaker coordinator and I am also in charge of the meetup and the Facebook. I wanted to bring something to the club's attention. This is very exciting. We now have 174 members in our meetup group. Boy, do I wish some of those 174 people would come to our club meeting. Don't you think? It's one thing to join a club, but not actually attend any of their meetings. Anyway, due to the pandemic, we seem to have a rapid rise in people joining our meetup. We had like 9 people join just in the last month alone. So I wanted to point out that that seems to be a good investment for us, and hopefully we can get more of those people to commit to coming to our meetings. I wanted to tell you just a bit briefly about next month's speaker, kind of like a sneak preview. We're going to have Rachel Herron next month. She is an internationally best-selling author of more than 24 books. Honestly, I'm a little surprised that she said yes to our club. She's kind of a big name. Her latest book from 2019, Stolen Things, got favorably reviewed by Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Book List, Crime Reads, and multiple New York Times and USA Today best-selling authors. She also teaches writing professionally at extension workshops at UC Berkeley and Stanford. So you'll want to stay tuned and come back in March for another exciting speaker.
That's great.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Okay, now we're going to start the workshop. So Gloria, who's starting the workshop?
Okay, so before I start the workshop, I just want to say that Laura is the person I admire most in this whole group. And the reason is because I can't even imagine considering trying to find speakers of a quality. I just, it blows my mind that she does that every month. So I want to thank her. So today's workshop, the topic is the metaphor. And so we're gonna, just like I said, we're not learning anything in these workshops. We're going over things that we already know. So I did put a note in the scribe that if you could come up with a metaphor, possibly to describe yourself, that would be fun. You can put it in the chat box while I'm talking. And depending on how you want to do it, you could put a metaphor about yourself and see if we can figure out who you are. Or you can just put a favorite metaphor in there. Or you can, you can handle that any way you want. But once I get to a point where I'm at a loss for words, I will go through the chat box and see what we can share regarding metaphors from the group. So I talked about inspiration last week, and after the meeting, I really had a feeling that I forgot to say something that I really wanted to tell you about. And so if I did say it, it'll be repetition, but I thought it was so interesting and important as far as inspiration that I'm going to go ahead and say it, whether it's repetitious or not. There is a movie on Netflix called The 12th Man. And it's a fictionalized account of a man who escaped Nazi-occupied Norway during World War II. And at the very beginning of the movie, if you haven't seen it, it says, it makes these different disclaimers and so on. And one of them says, the most incredible events in this story are the ones that actually took place. And I just thought that was such a great definition of inspiration and how life can just like drop stuff on your head that nobody could believe. And then it's so unbelievable that you have to completely fictionalize the surroundings or the background and everything else about what you're trying to say happened. So then moving on to real metaphors. We also, when we were talking about inspiration, we were saying that like a really great inspiration kind of comes from inside of you and goes out, you send it out to the world. But there's also inspiration that comes from the outside world through your senses and affects you. And that's what usually can spark a metaphor, something you see and you suddenly associate it with something else or something you hear. And it's not that it doesn't sound like what it is, but it immediately brings to mind some unrelated concept. So in contemporary prose, it seems that the focus very oftentimes is on the literary type of fiction where character development sort of moves to the forefront. And it's my personal conviction that in that type of environment, if you're writing where you're focusing on character development, I think the metaphor becomes more critical than ever because you haven't necessarily got a high action type of an environment. And the metaphor can help to grab the reader and help to keep the reader engaged with you. Let me see here. Now there are some authors, Kurt Vonnegut comes to mind, and Raymond Carver and stuff, these authors are so witty that they don't even need to use a metaphor. They can describe a real situation, and they're so clever about doing it that you don't really need a metaphor or anything to expand on it, because he catches you off guard with his, they catch you off guard with their openness. So I don't know how many of us, I haven't read the anthology yet, and this will be the first one that I'm buying. So I'm not sure how many of us are at that caliber, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of us are, but I think it's a real high bar to strive to achieve. So what I'm saying is, like, if you can write something that's really engaging without using metaphors, that's probably the highest form of your art, if you can keep people engaged. And a bad metaphor can kind of just kill the moment and really turn the reader off. You know, for example, like if you say, oh, the water snaked its way down the wall or something like that, it's out of place, and it doesn't really grab anything. So you have to be really careful with metaphors to not just put a metaphor somewhere as a descriptor without having a really valid emotion or something that you really want to convey, and then make sure that the metaphor is appropriate. A good metaphor, you find good metaphors so often in songs. I think that's one of their best. A good songwriter, a good lyricist is just like, their heart explodes with metaphors. Barb Jodry, I'm sorry, I don't know who she is. Is she here? Barb?
No.
The only reason I mention her name because in the newsletter last time, she mentioned that somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. I mean, she had a whole little kind of a quip or a paragraph about how that so inspires her that just thinking those lines just kind of puts her in the mood to really start writing. And that's an excellent example of a beautiful metaphor. And there are so many metaphors. Again, like I say, song is really one of the easiest places to find them. And I tried to make a list of some of the best ones I could think of. And this is my favorite metaphor of all time, I think, is MacArthur's Park is melting in the dark, all the sweet green icing flowing down. And I think about that all the time. Not exactly that I'm trying to figure out what it means, but it's just such a fascinating image, and I'm never completely sure what it really does mean. I mean, I do get it, but I think it's a fabulous metaphor. Anyway, and then it goes on, someone left the cake out in the rain. Raymond Carver's Cathedral is another great metaphor. It's also a symbol, but it morphs into a metaphor by the end of the tale. Now here's an interesting metaphor this is nonfiction, and it's a quote from Newton Minow. It's a pretty famous quote. He said, "When television is bad, nothing is worse. I invite you to sit down in front of your television set when your station goes on the air and stay there. Keep your eyes glued to the set until the station signs off. And I can assure you that what you will observe is a great, vast wasteland." And that was, I know, in the 50s and the 60s. Well, in the 60s, he said it in 1961. In the 60s, that was a kind of a battle cry for environmentalists and progressive people who were trying to keep our culture alive. So anyway, the Bible is a great source of metaphors. You don't have to believe anything in the Bible necessarily. You don't have to have a specific bent on religion, but you can't deny that the Bible is full of metaphors, beginning with the 6 days creating the world. And although some people take it all literally too, but I think that an awful lot of people appreciate the metaphor of that concept. Ezra Pound said, the book should be the ball of light in one's hand. And as authors, I think we can really appreciate that metaphor. And then the last metaphor that I came up with from literature or from other sources, and arguably, you know, I'll never, probably if I live to be 150, I don't think I'll ever know for sure if this is a metaphor or if it's actually a literal statement. And I don't think that there's the information in the novel to really truly confirm, is this a metaphor? Call me Ishmael. So I don't know if anybody has a comment on that or if what you think of that one, but I've always believed it to be a metaphor. I think mostly because of the location and the way it's expressed in the book. I just always believed it to be a metaphor. I kind of shot through the book using a computer search, trying to restore my memory on that too, trying to see could I get any further inklings on Call Me Ishmael, but I just couldn't see any place in the text of Moby Dick where it actually kind of really confirmed that this guy's name was Ishmael. So anyway, sobriquets are fun metaphors. Some people are just masters of sobriquet. And metaphors make the greatest titles for any literary work. I think a metaphor, a lot of times if you can't come up with how to name your story, just start thinking of them. For example, the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, you know, there you go. So, like I said, I am hoping that, let me see. Are we getting any metaphors?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Okay. So let me see here. We've got, my mind opens like the universe. No wonder I forget what I need to do every day. Okay, let's parse that. That's Ron's.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? Yeah,
Yep.
let's just parse it. Not to be overly critical, but technically, it's not a metaphor. Technically, that's a simile. My mind opens like the universe. And the only reason I bring that up is because there is a difference, and there is a difference in the reaction. And I'm thinking that sometimes when you're copy editing your work, if you do find a simile, sometimes you can rearrange the words and make it even more powerful when you turn it to a metaphor. The universe opens in my mind is a metaphor as opposed to my mind opens like the universe. So depending on situation, like I said, I'm not saying that for the point of critical, but it's a workshop. So I'm just pointing out that there is a difference between the metaphor and the simile. But so, real life is stranger than fiction. That's a classic, huh? And you can't go wrong with that one. I mean, there's nothing more true than that. and it's always something to keep in mind. So that's from Alita. And LaPaul, he was a gazelle as he jumped fence after fence in the neighborhood. So now, I don't know, is this something that happened to you? Is this something you did? I don't know. But it's a fact. He was a gazelle as he jumped. That's a nice metaphor. Okay, do we want to try to guess who this is? Do we know each other well enough? I don't really know anyone that well, but I'm going to give it. And then if anybody thinks they know who this is, I'm going to, shout it out if you think you know who this is. My metaphor is, my life has been a tapestry. These lyrics are in my first book. Had to put it in, had to.
Must be Carole King.
It does sound like it, huh? So Andrea put that down, but is that Carole King?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I'd be more than glad to sing it a cappella to you. I love that.
Mhm.
Oh, that was always one of the best. Did you see when she got that award, the Kennedy Center, I think it was?
No, I don't.
Or else it was the Medal of, I think it was the Kennedy Center. Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. It was one of the high points of Obama's presidency. And let's see.
Speaking of singing, Andrea, does anybody here write lyrics? Oh,
Not me.
okay. I've been trying to write some lyrics, so maybe someday I'll come out with a song.
Food for
Yeah, that's probably one of the greatest talents that I admire, don't you think? The ability to write some lyrics.
Aren't lyrics just poetry put to song?
Poetry in motion, yes.
Okay, I know a few people here who write poetry off the cuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're a musician, Wes.
Yeah.
What was that?
You're a musician.
Actually, I was raised by a musician.
Mhm.
We should have a music Zoom one night. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
We could talk about just music. That would be a blast. I love listening to it. I
Yeah, give me 2 beers and I'm off. Yep.
We could also sing, take turns. We like that. I love it.
Okay,
That would-
Gloria,
that
you
would
about
be
ready to
fun.
wrap it up?
You want me to wrap this up?
Yep.
So Wes, give me your lyrics. I'll put them to music.
I don't have lyrics, but other people here in this room do write poetry often.
Your mom does, Jeannie. She does a lot of poetry. So have you put some of her poetry to music?
I haven't,
know.
but I think I could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an idea. Some of our
If you start with the music, I think you've got a real advantage.
Mm-hmm.
If someone pulls the music out for you. So if you can find are you looking to find a lyricist for music that you're working on, or the other way around?
No, I'm just trying to put my lyrics to music. I am working with Jack Morris. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's still up in Eureka. But he used to be part of the Morris Chorus way back in the Hootenanny days. And so he's just come out with a song, and I just threw him some lyrics the other day and he started playing with it. So maybe we'll have another one pretty soon.
Cool.
There was a class or workshop the other day that CWC did, and the guy that did that workshop is actually teaching a class starting Wednesday through the Renaissance program at Sac State about how to write songs as a poet, I guess.
Great. What's his name again?
Hella, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Hang on. I think I wrote a note. about it. Sorry. His name is Al something.
Well, that's an odd name.
Al something.
Yeah,
Well,
I go by
find it
Andrea.
later.
I'm Andrea
Chat.
speaking, or Andrea across the street. That's my name.
I wrote it phonetically.
Okay, they,
Go ahead.
So M-E.
Al Tagoski.
yeah, that's it. He was at, I missed that because I was at Shut Up and Write, but California Writers Club had him on as a speaker, songwriters, instructor, publisher,
Right.
at the California Writers Club this last, what was it, Friday? I had a meeting then, so I couldn't go. I mean, I
Right, and
couldn't
so-
go on Zoom.
So he's doing a program through the Renaissance Society or Renaissance program through Sac State, if people are familiar with that, called Let's Write Some Songs. History and practice of songwriting. I haven't done the research on it to know about it. I'm looking into it. I've written a poem that I know needs to be a song, and then I have another title that needs to have, and then I want to write and make into a song. But at any rate, that's the whole story. So I have the lyrics, but I don't have a song. I don't have the melody. So I may take his class if I can figure out how to do that. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes at the same time.
Cool.
Um,
Cool.
but
Maybe
he's-
maybe
yeah.
we will have a music gathering.
But anyway,
Yeah,
so-
that just
It makes a big difference the way the singer presents the lyrics.
yeah. So if you're anybody not familiar with the Renaissance program?
Pardon?
Heard of it?
No.
Okay, so apparently, so I've never done it, but apparently Renaissance program at Sacramento State is like, apparently it is a standalone program. Effectively, it is workshops and classes that they do connected with the school. That's like, I don't know how to explain it now.
Well, they used to
But-
call it extension.
Yeah,
It's like an
open-
extension program.
It's open for anybody who, kind of the older crowd, and you can take these really cool classes. It's really a wonderful program.
Yeah, and they used to
If I was still in Sacramento, I'd be part of it.
Yeah, they used to have actual face-to-face meetings, face-to-face classes on Fridays and then they'd have
Right.
breakout groups based on whatever topics you were. And they had multitude of topics. So if you like birding, or you wanted geology, or you wanted hiking, or if you wanted cooking, they had a multitude of topics and hundreds of members. And so you can end up working with stuff.
Are they still
but
doing
our
it by Zoom?
speaker- I want to make sure our
Okay.
speaker has enough time to talk.
Okay,
It's
okay.
almost 8:00.
Okay, Gloria, do you have anything to wrap up with?
To wrap up, just that next week, we're gonna go over some websites. So if you have any, suggest them. The idea being websites that writers can use as references.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And anyone that wants to volunteer, please contact Gloria. It's a good experience to get up there and speak in front of everybody. Now Laura, you're gonna introduce guest speaker, and could you also ask him if permission for me to record, and I could post it on YouTube.
Okay.
All right.
Have we been recording this whole time?
I have been recording just since the workshop.
Okay, he's tuned back in. I see he turned his camera back on. Michael, do we have wait, we're posting this to YouTube?
Wait, if I get full permission, I will, yes.
Really? Is this new? All right, let's hear from Michael. Permission?
Well, it's fine with me. Sure.
Okay.
I'm all over YouTube. That's okay. That's fine.
Okay, so my job is to give a very brief introduction, but everybody should have read our newsletter, so they should already have all your highlights, which I'm going to condense very quickly because I'd really rather hear them directly from you. Journalist for 40 plus years, writer and editor for newspapers, basically all over the valley, too many to list. Worked with 2 wire services, published 3 novels, still actively writing for several newspapers, taught journalism at CSU Sacramento, our local Sac State that we were just talking about a minute ago, and also an accomplished blogger. So yes, please go into more detail about your accomplishments, and we await your fascinating speech.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to say something about metaphor just first, because that was interesting. I listened, I was lurking and listening. My favorite metaphor, and it's not really the metaphor, but it's from the Book of Mormon. Have you guys seen the book? Most of you have probably seen the Book of Mormon. Do you remember how metaphor figures into the Book of Mormon?
No, tell us, because I'm not familiar with that book. I mean, I know what it is, but
I mean, the stage play, Book of Mormon.
the stage play.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's actually, I'll probably spoil it, but I don't know if you'll ever get to see it. I don't know if it's still out there or not. There's this whole business about this native tribe, and that they were actually killing babies, and it was part of a religious ritual. And that's the whole premise of this whole play, which is it's a hysterical play. Anyway, at the very end of it, the cast all starts singing "It's Just a Metaphor," which you guys were talking about the Bible too. So anyway, all right, forget that part of it. We'll just move on from there. Now, are all of your mics live too? So if you decide you have a question, or have you all been muted?
Well, yes, everyone's muted, but if they have a question, they can unmute and they directly ask you, or they
okay. So you don't have a moderator who has to unmute you. You can just do it yourselves.
Correct.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Okay. Well, God, I've given so many of these talks, and it's always interesting to give them, but I've never done it on Zoom before. I have to admit, this is a new one. This is a new one for me. I do Zoom stuff all the time, but I'm usually listening and taking notes for a story or a column or something, and so it's a little bit different. But you all have good smiling faces so far, and I'll know if you decide to leave. That's the good thing, because you'll just disappear from the screen, right? So that's the way it works. Well, I think Laura did it pretty well and explained who I am. And one of the things that I noted in the chat box, because someone asked me to give, the membership chair asked me for some things. And the other thing I do, besides being a journalist and all the other things that were mentioned there, is I work as a writing coach sometimes, mostly for newspapers, sometimes for people that write columns like I do that need work. Although that's a dwindling market, I can tell you, because the number of newspaper columnists out there is just sort of, gone like this. In fact, I may be one of the last Jurassic journalists, still writing a column. So I'm happy to for a daily newspaper anyway. I sort of quickly put together, what am I going to talk about tonight, which was, what kind of writing do I do? How do I do it? And who do I do it for? Which is something that I thought maybe some of you would benefit from thinking of the writing you do. I'm at a great disadvantage because I have no idea what kind of writing each of you do and what you might be interested in terms of, what I do and whatever. So I'm going to give you kind of the general overview things. That's good. I'm getting a lot of nods from this corner of the screen, that corner too. And then after that, I'm going to do what I really hate with speakers, which is they basically say, well, just ask me questions. One of the worst things I ever went to was a talk by Seymour Hersh, who's a name that probably should ring a bell with most of you, the New York Times columnist, and wrote several books about Vietnam and other places. And I was working with a professor when I was a professor at Chico State, which I was a professor there before I came to Sac State. And we had gone to great lengths to bring in Seymour Hersh. And we filled Laxon Auditorium at Chico State, for those of you who know Chico State. And we had the president of the university there. We had the press there, the local press. we had everybody there that we could think of. We had a television station, and Seymour Hersh strides up to the podium and says, "I didn't really prepare anything, just ask me questions." And we could have strangled him, actually, but you can't strangle a Pulitzer Prize winner. So he went on with his talk. But I'll do that later. I'll try not to be as obnoxious as Seymour Hersh was. But questions about what you're doing, and I'm kind of interested in what you're doing too. I pick up that there's poets, there's musicians / poets. I'm guessing there's a novelist or two floating out there. So that will all be kind of interesting too. So I work as a column. My primary work, I would say, is as a newspaper columnist and also writing novels. And I have 3 novels out there. I have a 4th novel in the works. And both the 3rd novel that was published, which my wife always makes sure I have these handy if I have to give a talk. So the 3rd one is called The Devil. I don't know, let's see if you can see that. Yeah, The Devil's Pipeline. And got derailed by some guy named Trump. When he won office, the book sort of blew up for me in terms of my ability to write it. I did get it finished. I ran into a fellow here in Point Richmond who helped me get over that hump and finish the book. And I think it turned out actually to be probably the best of the 3 books that I've written. And the 4th book that I've been working on, it's called Sons of COVID, and it has nothing to do with COVID-19, but it's a catchy enough title that I thought it might work for a lot of reasons. It kind of ran into the same thing because once the election happened, events took place that caused all kinds of problems, because all 3 books, I won't hold them all up. There isn't room on the screen. All 3 books use as main characters people in the journalism world, because that's the world that I'm most familiar with, and so that's who I chose to use as characters. So they work not only in the fictional sense of the book, but they're also working kind of in real time, which my readers like, because they say it's almost like these characters are real. And for those of you who write fiction, which I'm going to guess is quite a few of you, you know that your characters are as they're real. And in fact, when I was giving a talk to a group at Sac State, not the Renaissance Society, but another group, I was trying to explain how characters, at least for me, actually steer the book to a degree that some writers nod their heads and say, no, that you're crazy. But when I sit down and write, it's not like I have to say, I wonder what my characters are going to do today. I sit down and write, and my characters kind of tell me what they're doing that particular day. And my wife, who edits my work before it ever goes to any other professional editors. She's a professional editor too. She'll leave in the morning, as she does almost every morning, for some class that she's teaching and or taking, and then she'll leave, and then the door will close. The door will reopen, and I'll say, "Did you forget your car keys?" And she'll say, "I've been gone for 3 hours. What have you been doing?" And it's because I've been, just diving into it so much. So that's the novel side of things. I guess I really wanted to talk about the newspaper side of it too, because I spend a lot of time working writing my column, but a lot of time coaching young journalists who are trying to either write columns themselves or to stay out of trouble. And I was working with somebody this afternoon for a couple of hours who has a really, really good story that is going to possibly put her even in some jeopardy, legal jeopardy. And she really wants to get the story out. And I've had trouble convincing her that what she needs to do is only work with legal documents and not just talk to people. And I don't know how many folks I'm looking at here on the screen, how many of you have ever worked as journalists, but the minute you start doing that he said, she said business, you put yourself at great risk. And this is a young woman who's very passionate about the business and is probably going to be a great journalist someday if she doesn't get sued and lose her condominium in the process. So I'm going to have to look down to what else I promised I would talk about here. Okay. When I started out in the business as a journalist or as a writer, I took the long way around the barn. I went to college back on the East Coast. I lived on the East Coast. I grew up on the East Coast, and I went to Villanova University. And Villanova University is a great college, provided you're prepared to go there. And I certainly wasn't. And I dropped out when I was I was 19. And a friend and I decided we were going to go to Mexico for the 1968 Olympics. The fact that we didn't know Spanish or had any money or had any real knowledge of what Mexico was didn't stop us. So we dropped out and we never really got to Mexico. We did do a lot of traveling. And then we ended up back in Jamestown, New York, where we had both grown up. And I left Jamestown a few years later and came to California, and then went to a couple of colleges out here, finally graduating from Sonoma State University. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sonoma State University, but it was built in 1969, 1970. And when we went there, they used to call it Granola State. And for a lot of obvious reasons, perhaps, but it was quite the place to go. And when I graduated from there, I just had a degree in English, focusing on American literature. And I was working for a newspaper at the time, but I was not working in the newsroom of the newspaper. I was working as a sort of a delivery guy in the circulation department. But every day while I waited for the newspapers to come off of the press, I read the newspaper cover to cover because we had a lot of time in between the press runs. And I got fascinated with the whole idea and ended up going to the publisher's office when I graduated from college. And he said he liked my work in circulation. My papers always got to the kids on time. Newspaper industry in those days, by the way, was the only business that spent millions of dollars on the front end and then gave its product to a 12-year-old child, to deliver. It was quite the system. But he said, I'd love to have you stay working with the newspaper now that you've graduated with that degree in English, which isn't worth a whole lot to a lot of people, but we can use you here. And I said, that's great. And he says, now we have a great opening in the advertising department, or we have a job in the news department. And he said, I can tell you today, I can pay you twice as much for you to work in advertising as the news department. And I looked out in the news department and I looked in advertising, and I don't know how many of you remember a program called WKRP in Cincinnati. Well, I looked out and the advertising department was full of people who looked like Herb Tarlick. They had white belts, white shoes, bad ties, wide ties. And over in the news department, most of the guys, and it was most of the guys in those days, had ties on, but nobody's tie was up around their neck. They were all down halfway to their belly button. And there was a lot of yelling going on in the newsroom, and in the advertising department, everyone was very staid. And so history took a turn, and I decided to go with the news department, which I never had looked back on. And since those days, as I used to tell my students at Sac State, I really only consider that I've had two jobs in my life. One was as a journalist, and the other was as a university professor. And honestly, and those of you who have had success at writing, and I'm going to guess you're all successful at writing, or you wouldn't be in a writing group. I've never had a day since I left college and went to work for that newspaper, the Napa Register it was, where I ever thought I had to go to work. It's like, And since I retired from the university and I get to set my own schedule and do whatever I want, it's really in that regard. I'm probably wandering in all kinds of different directions. That's because I got on too early and had another glass of wine before I started. But I think that from a writing perspective, I belong to a writers group here in Point Richmond. There were only about 20 of us in that writers group, and we're not anything active like you guys are, because most of the people in that writers group, with the exception of me and perhaps 2 or 3 others, aren't really active writers. And I can tell just from the interaction that I heard about the metaphor and everything, you guys are really writers, and that's really critical. And so from our writers group, the writers want to get together, and it seems to be a competition of who can put together the best hors d'oeuvres, and something like that, as opposed to the actual writing of what goes on. I'm going to do a Seymour Hirsch here for just a minute and see if any of you have questions about any of these things that I've prattled on about so far. I can tell you about, if you'd like, I can tell you about Arnold Schwarzenegger and what it was like to actually cover him. Or when I worked for the outfit called the Bureau of National Affairs, which is now owned by Blomberg. When I had to cover healthcare for those guys, and also cover the various nurses strikes that we had in Sacramento for a while. So I'm going to actually open up the questions, because I can hear my voice is starting to crack just a little bit. So you guys can unmute yourselves and just do that, and then we'll do it from there. If that works. That work for you?
Michael, I have a question.
Yes.
You touched on the subject of being sued. How often are writers actually sued, and what kind of outcomes are there from those suits? Do authors lose a lot?
No. If you're working with we're going to talk about all the different levels here. There's newspapers, and then there's for example, fictional work, a novel that you've written, and then there's a nonfiction. So there's magazine articles too, by the way. So there's lots of different aspects to your question. Let me start with newspapers. Newspapers don't get sued very often, and they don't get sued very often because the editors and publishers of newspapers are quite timid about publishing things that would ever get them in trouble. And what they're not really so afraid of the lawsuit, because most newspapers are, as I'll talk about books and magazines too, are very careful about what they publish. They don't want to be dragged into a legal battle because it's expensive. It's the lawyers that take all the money in the lawsuits. It's very rare. I was involved when I was a newspaper editor in 3 different libel legal actions that my reporters had gotten us into. And in each case, we were totally safe and on good ground. But in each case, the newspaper I was either forced to have someone write a retraction, or we backed away from it because of the cost of the cost of the lawsuit. When you talk about books and you talk about magazines, and that's kind of the world is kind of the same. You have professional fact checkers that go over things, and you also usually have a legal reading of whatever your book is. For example, in fiction, they want to make sure that none of your fictional characters could ever be considered some person who's actually alive and working. So you're usually pretty well covered from any shielded from any legal problems in that regard. And as an author, you want to make sure that that's the case. Now that's the interesting thing that you run into today is how easy it is to self-publish if you're willing to go through that process. or if you're even willing to go through Amazon Kindle, you can publish pretty much anything you want, at virtually no cost. And I would always advise everyone who wants to do that process to make sure you've had somebody read it who's knowledgeable enough to keep you out of trouble. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes, it did. I should have clarified.
Okay.
I have a friend who's writing a memoir, and in it, she mentions some school teachers by name and not in a very nice light. And she's been cautioned about that. And I suggest she change the name and maybe change the school if she wants to avoid any type of difficulty. That not knowing much about the libel laws.
Well, one of the things I've never written is a memoir. I mean, I've written a lot of things. I haven't written much poetry though, for the poets there. But memoirs are a landmine for what you're talking about, because in fact, I have 3 friends right now who are writing memoirs. And they've asked, in each case, they've asked me to take a peek at, their first few chapters or whatever to see, just to get another set of eyeballs on it. And in each case, they're naming people's names who in each case, they had trouble with early in their lives. These are sort of coming of age memoirs, and they're interesting. But I can see where somebody who was a bully when they were 15 or 16 years old, who is named in a book, as in one case, might not be too happy now that they're a 60-year-old or 70-year-old person, perhaps. I don't know how old they would be now, to have their name, kind of dragged up for some incident that happened, 40, 50 years ago. So yeah, you do have to be careful with that. And changing names is one way to do it. It's one reason I've never written a memoir, actually. I started one about 20 years ago. I only worked on it for a very short amount of time. And it was the same idea. It was a coming of age high school sort of thing. I did not have a great high school coming of age time. And so I had I was trying to probably exorcise an awful lot of demons with it. And I quickly realized that I was going to be hurting a lot of people's feelings, and maybe hurting, a lot of people, and possibly I wasn't really worried about the legal ramifications as much as I was just how hurtful it possibly could be. So I would advise the person you were talking about to consider changing the names, possibly as a way around it. Although if the people can still be identified or can identify themselves, they might not be very happy with that. I don't know.
Michael,
Yes.
there is one other aspect of exposing people who are not public figures or celebrities, and that's the right of privacy, which we all enjoy. Even in this age of social media, we are not public figures or celebrities. If you were writing about a public figure or a celebrity, you have the right of criticism and fair comment.
Correct. Sure.
When you're writing about a private citizen, you're really stomping on their rights of privacy. They also have a right of publicity, which you do not have for them. So even if they wanted the publicity, they could still sue you for, publicizing them. So those 2 rights, the right of privacy, the right of publicity, that each of us enjoy, unless we're public figures.
Right. And the whole that's a good point. And the whole idea of public figures, I mean, there's whole textbooks on the whole issue on libel, but the whole thing about public figures that's critical in the kind of, depending on what kind of writing you're doing, is I'll just throw this one idea out there. Otherwise it'll turn into a law lecture, which is way above my pay grade. And it's called a limited public figure. So if anybody here goes to, now, most of you are Sacramento, I'm going to guess based on the name of it, Sacramento region folks. So if you go to the Sacramento City Council and you stand up and you say, who's the mayor now? Is it still,
Steinberg.
Pardon me?
Steinberg.
Okay.
Steinberg.
Steinberg, yeah, okay.
Steinberg.
If Steinberg's still the mayor and you stand up and, I met him many years ago when I lived in Sacramento. In fact, one of his close aides is a former student of mine, now that I think about it. Daryl Steinberg. If you would stand up and say something nasty about Daryl Steinberg and your name appears in the newspaper, no matter what you said, you became a public figure when you stood up, and said that. You became a limited public figure. And a lot of people don't understand that, that you become a limited public figure at the scene of an accident on the highway. You jump out of your car, you're going to help somebody, and somebody's taking pictures of you or video, and you show up on YouTube, later that day or that week or that month or whatever. You're a limited public figure, and you really don't have a lot of recourse. So it's a tricky part of legal law, but
Yeah.
it's one that I used to have to deal with a lot when I was a newspaper editor. So
Right, because newspapers do have the right to publish news. And if you're
Right.
part of the news,
right,
you're there.
right. But let me say something about, because Mort brought this up, which is about names. So when I've been writing my novels, all I can say is thank God for Google. Because when you're looking for names of characters, you pick a name that you think is the most common name in the world, and you type it in, and you discover that there's 400 of these people scattered all over the United States. And so I go to great lengths to make sure that the characters have these, arguably very odd names sometimes, to avoid that. And I've also, I don't know about any of you, but I also have always loved the sort of names that Charles Dickens comes up with. And so some of the names of my novels are very definitely Dickensian type names, but that's names can get you in trouble. It's also it's also a way to have a little fun with some of that things that we were talking about payback in a memoir. I don't do a memoir, but I can put people's names in a novel slightly changed that become characters that, from other parts of my life. That's kind of a fun. I actually got caught on that in one of my books. This young woman said, that police chief sounds an awful lot like my uncle. And I said, really? It was her uncle, in fact. I had just changed the nickname that we had for him to a slightly different nickname. I should have changed it perhaps a little bit more than I changed it. So somebody else have a question.
Yeah, I've got a question about, I'm thinking on some of my books, I'm noticing that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that maybe somebody has that name. I'll just give them a middle initial with 2 letters to it, or something that I don't refer to them ever again by, but just to make it different.
Yes.
Do you think that would work?
I think that works. I mean, that's certainly one way to do it. The middle initial. It's safer to like I say, do the Google search and come up with some particularly different name, or just swap a couple of letters in it. Sometimes that works too. When I used to teach the beginning journalism classes back in the beginning, I used to talk to the students about how important it was to spell people's names right. And the students would always just shake their heads like, whatever. And so as an exercise, I would ask them I would take the roll sheet and put it up on the overhead and show them what their names look like. and they had, you know, names all over the place. And it was always interesting how surprised they were that there's probably 14 different ways to spell John, you know, for example, if you really look at it. And they couldn't believe it. You know, no, there's only one way to spell John. It's John. It's like, well, actually, no, I can spell it four different ways just off the top of my head right now. So, yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
It's kind of a two-part question about international issues. So number one.
Can you do it in a metaphor? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
In a metaphor?
Okay, sorry.
I had a reader in a reading group. We were always working through Slack. And so it turned out that one of the readers was in Australia. Didn't even know it. But she had a very good habit of pointing out things that she didn't know I was talking about. And it was because, like, if I said, oh, I lost my foot in Iraq, then she said, what were you doing in Iraq? And it just, I thought that one in particular was a bit more obvious, but obviously it's not. I mean, you know, to the everyday person reading, we're talking about novels, you know, so we're not talking about US News and World Report or something. So that was a question as far as, so ever since that type of issue started to come up, I'm always wondering, like, what do I have to do here? Do I have to start to be vague so that anybody in any country or location is going to know what I'm talking about? Or do I hate to have to qualify everything and go into some kind of a detailed explanation that bogs down the storytelling? And then the other part of that question has to do with international law, what you were just talking about. So libel laws are different in different countries. And this same reading group had a discussion about, like, how far can you go in a fiction piece and still say be describing somebody. And what came to mind was that old, I don't know if you're familiar with Macbeth, it was a parody of Macbeth that came out right after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the gist of it basically was that Lyndon Baines Johnson was actually like Macbeth, that he had killed the president, and it was certainly intended to be a spoof. But at the same time, it got past, like, the United States got over it in terms of it was able to be published and publicized and discussed and so on. But once it went to Europe, to England, it got quashed because of libel laws. So, so that's like two questions, like I say, but they're both international issue. I mean, because if you write a book, you kind of would like to see the whole world read it. Wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, of course. First, let me just throw back to you about the book you were talking about, or books that you would be writing. How many beta readers do you must use beta readers? You have readers take a look at your book before you kind of get to the finished product. Do you do that?
Okay, I've never completed a full-length book at this point. I've been focusing on short stories, but I am determined. I'm in the middle of a full-length book that will finish. And what's the difference between a beta reader and a reader?
Well, beta readers are and I don't know where that term came from, but somebody stuck me with it, and I've had it, and now it's stuck in my brain. That's what I call it's people who read in my case novels before they take that next level to go to a professional editor, or to go on, or in my case to the editor, to the publishing house.
Okay.
So they're first readers, and I use 5 people, and I've used 4 different people. One person has read all of the novels, not counting my wife. She's the ultimate beta reader before she's the first reader on everything before it goes to the beta readers. And they catch a lot of what you're talking about. You know, one of my books, I had a lot of obscure references to things that happened in the 1960s. one of the beta readers who was younger said, I don't get these
Oh, what you're talking about?
things here. What are you talking about? You know, and what is laugh in? And I was like, oh, you don't know what laugh in is. You know, so the beta readers catch you on those things, on that kind of stuff, as well as all the other things. You know, something is too risque or whatever. Again, it's not that you necessarily change the book or the sentence or even anything, but at least someone alerts you to it, as in the case you were talking about. So that's the best advice I'd have on those things. And then, you know, and sometimes language and things like that doesn't translate well for other countries, obviously. You know, I mean, I have a lot of British friends who are forever, you know, flummoxing me with talking about, you know, going to take the lift, meaning an elevator or things like that. You know, it just happens. About the international law, wouldn't worry. I mean, I don't think many of my 3 novels have gotten very, very far outside of U.S. zip codes, just because of the nature of the kind of environmental thrillers that they are, and they're all set in the United States. But there are countries that you would, and Britain being probably one of the worst about that in terms of libel laws, because they have criminal libel laws in Britain that I'm aware of, and the U.S., at least so far, and I hope never, has any criminal libel laws. So I don't know that you just have to count on a publisher to help you, you know, navigate through that particular swamp, pardon the pun.
Yeah, I guess, the publisher wouldn't touch it if they thought it was going to be a problem, I suppose.
Well, that's because any publisher of anything, whether it's a book, a magazine, a newspaper, Suburban Scribe, you know, the publisher of it is equally responsible as the writer, as the you know, the content provider. That's generally been the way it is in all of my dealings with legal matters such as it is. So the publisher in that case, in the case you're talking about, would probably be the one who would alert you to it immediately. If anything, they'll be much more conservative than you might be. And in fact, most arguments go the opposite way, that the writer wants something in and the publisher says, this makes me too nervous. This makes me too nervous.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And I do believe I might be able to shed light on the term beta reader. The old software programs used to have the beta versions. That was a completed version of the software, theoretically fully functioning with no bugs. But then users would be asked to volunteer to put them on their computers and see where the non-existent bugs actually were. And they always called it the beta version. I guess the alpha version would then be the final version.
Well, that's great. I really learned something tonight. Now that's probably true. I think that's probably where it came from. That's probably where it came from.
Just as a quick comment, as the editor of the newsletter, I have refused to publish some stories or poems that were really off the wall. And so thanks for reminding me that I'm legally responsible.
Yeah, over the years, in addition to everything else, I've published newsletters for organizations that I belong to. I tried not to do it for very long. You get nominated for sainthood for doing it. It's a difficult job, I know. But in particular, I was a member of the Oakland Yacht Club, and I was editing the newsletter there, and we got into one of those spats among some of the members, and they decided to use the newsletter as the place to have their spat. And I had to start, I had to basically turn things back and just say, we can't get into that. And it wasn't that I really wasn't enjoying the spat, because it was kind of fun, but I didn't want to be responsible for the fallout from it. I don't think anyone would ever sue a yacht club, but I don't know.
There's always one out there.
Yeah.
Someone was willing to sue the Writers Club over an unauthorized picture that they had rights to. This was years ago and not me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Michael,
Yes.
to drive this libel thing further into the ground, I have just a follow-on question to it. For music lyrics, there's like a 72 or 73 year period. You can use, if they're older than 72 or 73 years old, you can use the lyrics.
I'm not entirely, I can't say if that's true or not, but the law about music is complicated enough that anything that we'll say is relatively new, relatively current, is such a pain to put into a book that to get the permission that I've wanted to use it in all three books. Well, I wanted to use it especially in the first novel I published, and a friend of mine who is a former student and now a law professor at Cal State Sacramento, in fact, she was the one who sent me in the direction of this writers group that said that you might be looking for a speaker. She helped me look into what it would take to get. I mean, we're talking about 2 lines of lyrics from a song from the 1970s, and it was so complicated and going to be potentially so expensive. It just wasn't worth it. So you do want to take things that are way out of copy. Yes, something that's way out of copyright. Something
Yes.
Something from.
But there is no time frame for in writing.
Well, there is in writing too. Right? Copyrights on books can only last for, I think, how long is it now? Gosh.
40 years?
Oh, it's
40?
longer. It's longer, I think, than that. It's considerably longer than that. But
Something like 70 years after the death of the author.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Or 100 years for Mickey Mouse.
What's that?
100 years for Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
If you're in doubt, I urge you to contact your local patent and trademark center. They are all over the United States and they employ law librarians to assist you in this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is me, the librarian, talking for just a moment. And by the way, I did have a question. Where does satire figure into this? Because, over even centuries, well-known political and religious figures, social figures have been ridiculed through the use of satire. So can you effectively publish a satire novel and take on a well-known figure that way?
Yes, because in a sense, because as pointed out earlier, they're public figures. They're public figures, and so their standard, the standard for them to be successful in winning some action against you for a satirical novel is very, 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 very high. The reason that that you do want to be slightly cautious about that is that even though the legal standard may be very high, if they have a lot of money and just want to torment you as the writer, author, or publisher, you can find yourself, spending a tremendous amount of money just defending yourself. I have a good friend who lives in the Finger Lakes, where I lived for a few years, which is how I ended up writing for a Finger Lakes, New York newspaper, even though I live in California most of the year. Who publishes a newsletter on a weekly basis about the environment. And for a long time, he was just out there on his own with no legal protections and nothing backing him up. And had he ever gotten into a legal action, he would have been in grave. He might have lost his house, I would think. But he's since figured that out. I think he has a libel insurance policy now, and he has some investors who keep him afloat. So, but yeah, satirical novels like that. Think about all the things you see on Saturday Night Live. Imagine the obviously there's defamation involved in all of that stuff. Good fun, but defamation. But it's because they're public figures. It's because they're public figures. Yeah. Yes. It's all quiet there in Hollywood Squares. Is there anybody else?
Hollywood Squares.
Well, you know, if we've run out of things to talk about, I would love to hear what you think about how the newspaper industry has changed over your career and where you think it's going.
Well, I better get another glass of wine. But let me, yeah, I can talk about that for briefly. I do want to say that it's really sad, particularly those of you, all of you who live in Sacramento, to see what's happened to the Sacramento Bee in recent years. I was there back in the 90s. I worked as a consultant, essentially putting out the opinion section, maybe 4 weeks out of the year, sometimes 6, when the forum editor would go on vacation. And at the time, that newspaper was a force, you know, in the community. And then it started to hit its decline. If you remember, when the Sacramento Bee, when the McClatchy Corporation rather purchased the San Jose Mercury News and purchased a whole series of very expensive newspapers at a time when newspapers were starting to lose money and just gradually die, they decided they were smart enough, they were going to, you know, pick these papers up and go in the other direction. So that's particularly sad for me, because at one time that was one of the best newspapers in the state of California, and right, you know, right there with the San Francisco Chronicle and the LA Times. And then somebody came, so Craig Newmark came in and you know, started something called Craigslist, which essentially took away classified advertising from all newspapers. And it was a newspaper killer, because that revenue meant a lot to those newspapers. And then right about that same time, I was involved with a group that was meeting in Oakland, and we were trying to figure out this thing called the internet and how it related to newspapers. And a lot of the newspaper publishers and owners really didn't think it was any kind of a threat or much of anything. And but those of us who were editors, and I was working as an editor at the Bee and also as a J-Prof at Sac State, we said, you can't give away the stories that you put in the newspaper. You just can't, you know, you can't do that. We argued for what you now call a paywall behind it. And the publisher said, no, this was not going to be, you know, this was not going to be a threat. And those of you who probably spend, you know, look at the online versions of newspapers, as I do every morning, it killed the print edition, and the print edition was where all the money came from. So what's, you know, and it's just, the decline of them has been astounding in the last decade, as you've all no doubt seen and documented. And, you know, we can talk about the decline and why it declined. The bigger issue is what it's meant for a lot of communities, and for smaller communities that used to have a daily newspaper, they just don't have one anymore. Consequently, and there have been a number of studies done about this, the shenanigans that go on within local government that used to be covered by local newspapers, and so the people in the community would know what was going on, they don't know what's going on anymore. The people just don't know what's going on. So things happen, taxes get raised, new fees happen, schools get approved, you know, projects get approved, people get fired, I mean, all kinds of things. And there's just there's no recognition of what's going on. And I wish I had some kind of good answer for it, or some good possible solution on the horizon, but it's not getting any better. And all the alternatives that people have been looking at, you know, online newsletters and things like that, they're just not the same. They're just not the same. So I work with a newspaper here in Point Richmond that's funded by grants from nonprofit organizations, and it provides a pretty good cross section. But this is a city. I'm in a city of 125,000 people, and this newspaper is run essentially by college students and me, as I said earlier, the Jurassic journalist, and I don't do a lot of writing for them. I do a lot of helping and consulting, but it's not adequate for a city of 125,000 people. I mean, we're not in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, so. That's an awfully grim way. We got to end on a much more happier note than that. That's got to be something better than that. But so I'm curious about you and what some of you are working on. That maybe isn't what the guest speakers usually do, but I am curious. Are there any novelists floating around out there? There's one, two, three. Oh gosh. Great company, great company.
Well, I'll go first. I'm a early adopter, I guess. I just finished my love story wrapped in a mystery, and I'll have getting hopefully Jenny Glassenmacher to look at it. She's a professional editor, taught English for 27 years, and she happens to have a retired husband who was a lawyer. So somehow that seems to help. Also, she has a publishing house. So while I'm waiting for her to, her schedule is kind of tied up. So in March, we'll get together. But in the meantime, I've been writing my 500 or 600 page sci-fi that I wrote back in the 90s, trying to clean it up. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I write, I'm talking to myself as I write. And so I explain everything to myself. And I have this huge, sentence structure, which when I go back through it, I really have to trim it down. And so that's what I'm doing right now. This is the first real trim down in about 15 years. And then I'll trim it down again until I get it tight, and chop it into 2 books probably, because everybody wants to read 200 pages, not 500, maybe.
Yes.
My first novel was 90,000 words. I don't do it in pages, I do it in words, but 90,000 words, which proved to be a little bit too long. And I spent some time in an airport one day and going through the bookshelves, just looking at checking out the books. And I discovered that the ideal airport book, I think, is about 70,000 words. That seemed to be the ones that were coming off the shelves, and actually a lot of the New York Times, the crime novels, the science fiction books, things like that. So the second 2 books were about 70,000 words. So
yeah, that's just about exactly what I have for that, maybe 68, 69,000 for the love story, mystery, thriller, whatever it is. The other one, supposedly science fiction, you can write like 120,000 words, but I favor keeping it smaller. I mean, Animal Farm was something like 45 or 50,000 words. So you can sell whatever is out there if it's good.
Right. Yeah. What about some of the rest of you? What sort of novels are there?
Well, excuse me. Some years ago, I found myself in the middle of a kind of a very high profile crime in San Francisco, but I had nothing to do with the crime. I just knew everybody who was involved with this crime.
That's what they all say.
Pardon?
That's what they all say.
Right. Okay. But anyway, I digress. The point is that this crime, pretty much everybody who was involved is dead by now. And it was all over the newspapers. So issues of like libel and stuff are not the issue. And it also, because of the way that I was involved with it, I had no interest in documenting what happened, but I felt like I had a behind the scenes picture of what really happened because it never was really solved. I'm making it sound different, but I mean, it was a RICO thing, so they never solved those. Nobody ever wants to testify, but I felt like I was watching this happen and nobody was testifying. But anyway, the point is, I had started working on this as a crime novel to make up my own version of what I perceived was actually going on. And critical to this crime novel is the concept that at the time I didn't think anybody would understand it, but the concept of systemic racism. And all of a sudden in the last few months, it's become a battle cry, and it's on everybody's lips, and people understand the meaning of systemic racism. No, everybody doesn't necessarily agree with it. But I suddenly started working on this novel. I took it out of mothballs and I said, okay, now people will know what I'm talking about. And it creates an awful lot of trying to put it together. It creates a need for a lot of devices. For example, if there is an African-American character and something's going on around this person, we're going to find out what happens on the surface from the observer, but we also have to go inside this person's head of how they're perceiving it. And so I won't say I'm struggling with, but that's a big issue that I keep trying to change back and forth. How am I going to go with like brackets and italics to say what this person's thinking based on what's actually happening and things like that. And then the point of view has also, it's shifted over time. It was originally just a given in my mind that it was going to be a first person point of view. And then I started to realize I'm making up half of this stuff, and I'm making up stuff that I couldn't possibly know as the narrator. And I think I've kind of also, I've kind of reconciled how to work that out too, because like I said, it's a RICO thing. So there's grand juries and so on, and putting a kind of literally a combination of an omniscient narrator combined with a first person narrator. I think I finally found out how to, or figured out how to kind of weave that. And so that's what I'm working on. And I'm having so much fun with it, but I hope I don't get too bogged down in having too much fun, because I really do have too much fun when I write. But
well, I think it should be. I think it should be fun. And the other thing is, you know, you don't want to don't overthink it. You know, with your for example, should I use brackets? Should I use italics? In today's world, it's easy enough to just pick one and go with it, and put it together, and then give it to somebody else and let them take a peek at it and hold your breath. You know, but I think that I think enthusiasm for it is what's important, and enthusiasm particularly in writing novels. You know, it has to be. When I'm doing it, it's my favorite part of the day, you know.
It is fun. It really is fun.
When I write a column, I'm usually chewing somebody out, but when with the novel, you know, you're trying to tell a story. And most of my novels are or I'll call them environmental thrillers, and the bad guys are always the gas companies. Oil and gas companies, because they're so easy. They're so easy, you know. And I just have a good time weaving in the science. Where for me, the tricky part sometimes is weaving in the science part of it. Yeah. So somebody else who's working on something out there, who dares speak.
I can speak. So I call myself a genre hopper. I have suspense adventure out there. I have a political thriller. I have a paranormal thriller, and I have a sci-fi. So I'm all over the place. I don't know who I am. But I enjoy writing, and the main theme of most of mine, they're kind of thriller type, character driven.
Good, good. That's good.
And paranormal romance. Leaning towards sci-fi.
You know, one of the things I didn't talk about that I meant to is kind of, you know, how I go about this, and I'll just tell you that my mornings between 9 and 11, and that's only 2 hours of the day, but 9 and 11 are dedicated to either writing a column or the fiction writing, or sometimes writing for this little local newspaper. And then the rest of my day is not caught up with writing at all. It's caught up with just the rest of life, reading the New York Times and doing whatever. Because I have up on the wall here, I have a checklist that Henry Miller put out many years ago, talking about how he went about his writing of the various books that he did and the various things. And he did that, and he said spend a lot of time just wandering around and enjoying life, and in the library, he also suggested. But that brings me back to something I did want to mention, which is what I used to talk to my students about briefly. Most of them, when they would be in a class and they were working in a class typing, they would type like this, you know. 1, 2, 1. And I would bring in people from the Associated Press and other places around Sacramento, Sacramento Bay, whoever it was. And invariably, I would have one of the students ask the question, how long does it take you to write a story? Now, we were talking about news stories, very specifically news stories, which is, you know, anywhere from 400 to 600 words for the most part. And and I would always have the speaker set up to answer pretty much the same way. They would say, well, how quickly can you type? How fast can you type? And because a lot of writing, I mean, there's a time to ponder and there's a time to write really fast. And I because I've, you know, started in the business as a journalist and continued on my other writing, I'm still a journalist, which means I type as fast as I can, you know, as fast as I can. And I think that actually has helped me to get those drafts of my books out. So all 3 of the books, and you know, you can read them and make your own judgment about how good they are, but they each took about 6 months to write, start to finish, from concept to beta readers, and then another month or 2 to actually get out, you know, to go through the publications process. Because the way I look at it, it's 1,000 words. If you did 1,000 or 2,000 words a day, you know, you've got your 70,000 words in a relatively short amount of time, and then you do revisions, and then, you know, you go from there. And I don't know how many of you have any of you read James Lee Burke? Are you familiar with his work? The novelist James Lee Burke. He writes detective fiction, crime novels. He's written probably 30 of them now, and he writes a lot about Louisiana, and he writes about Angola prison sometimes, and he talks about that the prisoners there refer to their prison sentences as stacking time. And what I used to tell my students, and now when I talk with these young folks at the Richmond Pulse newspaper, I tell them they're just stacking paragraphs. It's just one paragraph, you know, after another paragraph, after another paragraph. And that's kind of the way I look at it when I'm writing the novels. I don't think of it as I have to do a chapter today, or I have to do it. I just have to do 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, or paragraph. Anyway. So we probably reached the appointed hour for your, where's Laura? I don't see, I'm looking for her square. There you are, okay.
8:55. I do want to ask, is there anybody who had a question who didn't get a chance? You know, we do technically have 5 minutes left. No?
I've got a small question. Michael, when you're sitting for 2 hours, and you're not trying to necessarily do pages, just stack paragraphs, on average, how many pages do you get out, or how many paragraphs?
Well, the goal is 1,000 words. 1,000 words. If I do more, that's great, but 1,000 words. And if it's a thing where I'm really on a roll, which sometimes happens, it can be 2,000 words. Now that isn't 2,000 finished words necessarily, but it's there, and you know, you go back through it. Beta readers help you with all that kind of stuff, but yeah, but it's 1,000 words. Jack London, who was one of my favorite authors, not necessarily for the work he produced, but for the kind of life, you know, the life he lived. For practically every day of his adult writing life, which was only about 20 years, he started seriously writing when he was 19, and he died when he was 40. He wrote 1,000 words a day. Anywhere he was, on the deck of a ship, sailing his own sailboat to Australia and back and everything, he wrote 1,000 words a day, and produced 40 books in his lifetime. So published 40 books in his lifetime.
Is
Probably
that,
was more.
excuse me, is that about a few pages, like 5? I'm just trying to gauge because I'm trying to be more consistent.
I'd say it's maybe 5 pages, probably. I think a lot, depending on how you do your pages, you know, about 200
Yeah.
words per page.
Yeah, I'm just like, say you do, what is it, 1.5 space or whatever. What does a typical novelist do today, I think about?
Well, a lot of one of my beta readers on the last book really chewed me out because I didn't have it double spaced.
Mhm.
She likes to write in between, you know, in between everything. And so you usually a double space and a half or double space, because if you're looking for somebody to literally pencil edit your manuscript, you've got to give them a little space to do it. When I'm done with my first draft of the books, I hand it to my wife, who, as I say, is a professional editor, and she looks at it. Only she's got the actual Microsoft Word document, and she makes changes as she sees fit. And the deal we have is, if I get it back and read it and I don't even notice the difference, then it's fine, you know. But if I spot it and go, well, I'm not sure about this, then we maybe have a discussion. But she's good enough that she doesn't change my voice. Hasn't changed my voice enough that I doubt we've had a half a dozen conversations over 3 books where something really needed to be changed.
I like that idea of, trying to do at least 4 pages or so. I don't look at the pages, but I do find that if you're doing some other work, just to be consistent, then you don't lose track of your thought process. Then you're kind of going back and also looking at, okay, what did I do before then? Did this happen? So your settings and characters and it coincides enough, and your timing and whatever.
And as I said, I have a lot of reasons to not be happy with former President Trump, but he has derailed this book also because of the election and things that happened afterwards. So that when I get back to it, which I hope to do sometime in the next few weeks at the latest, I really have to go back and look at what I've written before.
What do you?
My direct was that the election process and the fallout between the election process right up until fairly recently derailed the ability of me to complete my novel because of the way my novels are structured on news events. So it wasn't. I'm blaming him for the politics of it, but that's what it was. It's I couldn't proceed with my book in a timely fashion, and that happened in 2016 also.
Is that, Michael, because the news was so compelling you had to write about it, or something in your book was going to expose something that actually happened? I mean, what's the detail?
It was that the themes of the books we're going to be overshadowed by the reality of the world. In other words, if I'm right, if I was using the characters I was, and I do, who are actively running newspapers, I couldn't have them focusing quite so much on what I wanted the storyline to be as much as what was happening nationally. They couldn't just look the other way about what's happening and continue with what the plot line was. That's what it was. So I think I figured out how to fix that in the current book.
So can't you put it in a different era, 10 years ahead, 20 years behind?
That's creative. That's a creative approach.
Michael, you're actually muted.
There, I'm unmuted. My computer muted me. I guess it was tired of listening to me. That's what it was. Yeah. Well, thank you all. You've been a good audience. This has been a fascinating experience, seeing all you guys and everything, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for all the information. Thanks everyone for all the good questions and stuff.
Somewhere over in the chat is my email address. If you want to email me about anything, I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay.
So everyone look down at the chat window and
it's in the newsletter.
It's in the newsletter too.
It's
probably.
in the newsletter.
I'm trying to add a chat and I can't figure it out. Okay. How do you chat?
so down at the bottom, right in the middle, there's a chat.
Yeah, I've typed something, but how do you get it to show up on the screen?
Just click on chat.
Then hit enter when you're finished typing.
Just send. Send where?
Hit enter when you finish typing, hit enter.
There might be a little arrow off to the far right. I have entered on my screen. I have to hit a little arrow on the far right.
So much easier in person.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and in the chat window, you can chat to everybody or you can chat to individual people. Oh, Robin, you got a lot of feedback.
Yeah, it's not happening. Oh, well.
I'm going to sign off. Good night.
Okay.
Hey.
Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good stuff. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.